Hey gang, Logan here. I am in Scioto, I think I'm pronouncing that right, State Park here in central Ohio near Chillicothe, and I wanted to record a video today that I've been thinking about for quite a while. Naturally, as soon as I start recording, a motorcycle drives down the back road, but hopefully he'll quiet down here in a second. My buddy Drew and I had a conversation about a week ago about courage and about going ahead and speaking our truth even when it may make us seem out there, because we hold views that may not be well understood by the majority of folks yet. But we admire so many people in what some call the esoteric community that are speaking their truth, truth that they've concluded after a lot of research, a lot of seeking, a lot of intellectual work. And Drew and I feel like we're in the same category because we feel so drawn to trying to find out answers to why the world is the way it is. And we both decided it was time for us to screw up our courage and speak our truth even more blatantly than maybe we have in the past. And I want to do a video today on a very difficult topic that basically is about genocide, and the belief that I have after a lot of research that there is a form of genocide taking place in the United States. It's taking place worldwide, but it's particularly intensive here in the United States. And it's being perpetrated by people who are hidden in plain sight, people who through the last 150 years have declared in writing and in many other forms of communication that that they believe that there are too many people on this planet, but beyond that they believe that there are too many of the wrong people on this planet. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but one historical realm you have to understand to make that claim I just made make any sense is an understanding of the evolution of something called eugenics. Eugenics is a pseudoscience that has to do with the concept of the master race that Hitler and the Nazis popularized. But they weren't the inventors of it. They were predated at least by 75 years or more by a number of intellectuals and kind of ruling class folks in England and America, particularly in America, who advanced eugenics as a variation on Darwinism, that it was possible through selective breeding to create a better human, and related to that, it was essential that we eliminate lesser humans in order to clean the gene pool. Hitler didn't invent that. He mimicked and built upon information that came really in large part from the United States of America in the late 1800s, early part of the 1900s. He even wrote about that and credited American eugenicists as being among the pioneers that gave he and his whacked out brethren the ideas that they tried to put into action. So eugenics is not just about eliminating people, it's about interrupting the ability for certain peoples to procreate, to have a next generation, to stop their breeding, if you will. So let me give you an example, a very recent example, of a whistleblower from the Center for Disease Control who came out last August in 2014. Basically, he was outed. But he contacted a researcher and a father of an autistic child who was very much an activist in that realm and trying to prove the link between certain vaccines as a cause, a contributing factor to autism. And Dr. William Thompson contacted a gentleman by the name of Brian Hooker via a series of phone calls and fully admitted that he and 4 of his CDC scientist colleagues had altered and faked information, test results, from a vaccine study they did back in 2001, trying on their part to disprove any causal relationship between the MMR vaccine and autism. What he fully admitted to was that after the study was done, there was a clear correlation, higher correlation among African American boys with developing autism for those boys who took the CDC recommended MMR vaccine schedule up to the age of 5, those African American boys were developing autism at 340% higher rates than the general population. But instead of publishing that, which should have sent off alarm bells, especially to the African American community, they went back and altered the data, and they removed large portions of the African American boys that developed autism by using a technique that was used back during the Civil Rights Movement and toward empowering the African Americans with the right to vote. They removed all the African American children that did not have a birth certificate, which removed a lot of the socioeconomically challenged families from the Deep South, CDC based in Atlanta, Georgia. And when they removed all those children, and they were able to smooth out those statistics and the direct correlation between the MMR and high rates of autism in African American boys was eliminated, and they published that study. Well, 13 years later, he basically says on a phone recording, and he's hired a whistleblower attorney, William Thompson. It's not been covered in the mainstream media at all. Total blackout, no surprise, that they lied, and he couldn't live with it anymore. So what does that mean with regard to eugenics and genocide? Well, if 340% higher rates of autism mean that portion of African American males never procreate, they never become husbands, that is a form of genocide. Anything you do to reduce the birth rates of a certain type of genetic pool is genocide in and of itself, and it's eugenics. It's selective breeding. I believe, and I think the more you look into this, the more self-evident this is, that this is happening at a mass scale. That's just a more dramatic, direct example. But the wealth of artificial intelligence information that's collected on Americans and people worldwide, genetic information, eugenics didn't go away. They just kind of changed the name when it was soiled by Hitler's actions. And it became things like molecular biology. Transhumanism is a common term used now, which means beyond being human. Ray Kurzweil, a senior executive at Google, a massive data collection monster for individual information, is a leading thinker in the idea that man will merge with machine and become a new species, and it's inevitable, and it will be that version of life will be far superior to an organic human. He's a eugenicist. J.D. Rockefeller, world's most successful monopolist, father of the modern medical allopathic medicine, cut, burn, and medicate monopoly. No surprise, he was an accomplished monopolist. Was a eugenicist. They all wrote about this stuff. It's hidden in plain sight. So we put our medical care, our very health, into the hands of people that believe there are too many of us on the planet. And not only too many, but the wrong ones. That they, in their great intellectual superiority, have the ability to choose who's worthy and who's not. And that you and I aren't privileged to that information or that choice. It sounds really radical if you've not been exposed to any of this information, but if you study history, not the history you're taught in compulsory public education, you're taught what you're supposed to believe, but you dig and you do your own research, you'll find countless citable, verifiable examples and sources and citations that support this information. So I believe there's a total toxic soup of ingredients going into the human being right now, and they're not random. It's not purely driven by profit. Let me give you some examples. And if you step back and you looked at this objectively and forgot that you grew up being introduced to these ways of being, you can start to sense how crazy it is if no one had ever heard of a mercury tooth filling, and I came to you and said, hey, I'm going to take at least among the top 3 most toxic substances on the face of the earth, but if I place it in your tooth next to your brain, suddenly it's benign and it doesn't cause you any harm. It's a crazy thought, but amalgam fillings are typically as much as 50% mercury. Placed in a tooth, off-gassing right next to your brain, for, you know, a lifetime. Fluoride. Sodium fluoride is a major ingredient in rat poison. It used to be. It's a byproduct of the aluminum smelting industry. It's a toxin. But magically we put it in our drinking water without people's choice. You don't get a choice of your municipal drinking water if you grow up in a city that made the choice for you and fluoridated you, medicated you. It's insane. And no study has ever verified that fluoridated water reduces cavity rates unless it's a classic old tobacco science study. It's funded by the very industries, as the early fluoride studies were funded by the aluminum industry, who instead of paying millions of dollars to dispose of a toxic substance from aluminum smelting, could in turn turn around and sell it to municipal water supplies. It's crazy. And aspartame, one final example among many. FDA turned it down for 13 years repeatedly because of its toxic effects on the body. It literally converts to formaldehyde inside the human body. And yet when Donald Rumsfeld, in between his stints as a senior executive in the federal government, as defense secretary, when he becomes president of GD Searle, now a subsidiary of Monsanto, magically within 18 months aspartame is approved and now is ubiquitous in products that most Americans are ingesting whether they know it or not. 3 examples of crazy stuff. No single one of those may be causing ill health in and of itself, birth defects, chronic illnesses. But you start to combine these things together and you start to ponder the possibility that advanced genetics, advanced science, science that you don't get exposed to, you won't see in an article in Time magazine, can use the advanced knowledge of genetics and the gene pool information that's been collected over the last half century through intelligence means and now artificial intelligence, these supercomputers that know everything about us through every form of electronic record keeping, that these things in combination could be matched genetically to weed out certain genetic strains, certain races, certain ethnicities. If you really, really look into it, and I have for years now, it ceases to sound so crazy, particularly since these people, these ruling elite, these families that go back hundreds, in many cases thousands of years, have stated publicly in writing, in books, in lectures, that they believe in eugenics and they believe in their ability and their right to choose who lives and who dies. Henry Kissinger is famously quoted as referring to the unwashed masses, us, as useless eaters. So that's a pretty negative topic to bring up. But let me end on a high note. It isn't going to work. People are waking up to it.